Imagine waking up one day to discover that every single chain binding you to the world has quietly fallen away. No deadlines, no obligations, no parents or teachers, no bosses or governments, no religion telling you what is right, no society whispering what is wrong. Every expectation is erased. You are free, utterly, terrifyingly free. At first, you might think such freedom would taste like honey, sweet, intoxicating, limitless. Isn't this what humanity claims to desire above all else? The dream of emancipation, of living without walls, without authority, without fear. Yet, as the silence of this unshackled life stretches on, something unsettling creeps in. The air feels too vast. The choices are infinite, but with no direction, they become suffocating. You feel weightless, untethered, like a body floating in deep space with no gravity to anchor it. This is the paradox. True freedom, the very thing we believe we crave, can be the most frightening state of all. Because when nothing controls you, nothing protects you either. When all paths are open, none of them feel real. Why does this happen? Why does the heart tremble not when imprisoned, but when freed? Think about how you've lived your life so far. From childhood, you've been given lines to color inside. Get good grades. Respect your elders. Find a stable job. Be polite. Don't ask too many questions. These invisible guardrails, as suffocating as they sometimes feel, also offer security. They whisper, here's the way. Follow this, and you'll belong. You'll be safe. But what happens when those lines disappear? When there is no longer a voice above you dictating what must be done? You suddenly face a raw, unfiltered responsibility for everything, your choices, your mistakes, your very existence. The burden is crushing. Because now, if you fail, you cannot point the finger at your parents, your boss, your faith, or your culture. You stand alone. Does freedom still feel sweet now? Or does it begin to taste bitter? There is a hidden terror in freedom, one we rarely acknowledge. Most of us don't actually want it. We say we do, but deep inside, we cling to the comfort of cages. We prefer the familiar walls of expectation, the predictable routine, the certainty of someone else telling us, this is the right thing to do. The truth is, obedience feels safer than freedom. And yet, something within us still resists being caged. We rebel against rules, push against authority, crave autonomy. It's as though the human soul is caught in an endless tug-of-war, one side yearning for security, the other screaming for liberation. So which is it? Do we truly want freedom, or do we fear it? Imagine again that morning where you awaken with absolute liberty. No schedules, no authority, no meaning already carved out for you. The hours stretch before you like a blank desert. Do you feel exhilarated or paralyzed? What would you even do first? Create a masterpiece? Wander the world? Collapse into despair? The horrifying possibility emerges. Without something to fight against, without some rule to break, without some structure to resist, you may discover there is nothing inside you at all. That all along, your identity was not self-created but borrowed, from your parents, from your culture, from the world around you. Stripped bare by freedom, you are forced to confront the terrifying void of your own being. And so the great question rises like a storm on the horizon. What if freedom is not the gift we thought it was, but the mirror that shows us who we really are? What if the very thing we chase is the very thing we fear, because it strips away the illusions and leaves us with nothing but our naked self? Most people never reach this question, because society keeps us too distracted to ask it. Work, money, entertainment, relationships, responsibilities. All these serve as masks and buffers, preventing us from staring into the abyss of liberty. But once those masks are torn away, when you stand face to face with pure, undiluted freedom, the question can no longer be avoided. Is true freedom a blessing, or is it a curse? The answer will not come easily. To uncover it, we must travel deep into the hidden structures of the human psyche, into the philosophies of those who have wrestled with this paradox, into the subtle forces that shape our fear of liberation. This is where the journey begins. Why is true freedom so unbearable? Why does the very thing we associate with salvation feel like exile? To answer this, we must peel back the skin of the human psyche and examine the muscles, the sinews, the hidden roots of fear and desire that shape our every decision. At the heart of it lies an ancient contradiction. The human being is both creature and creator. As creatures, we long for stability, order, and guidance. We crave safety the way a child reaches for a parent's hand in the dark. But as creators, we ache for self-determination, for the chance to carve meaning with our own hands, to stand tall as architects of our destiny. Freedom awakens the creator in us, but it also strips away the creature's protection. Carl Jung once observed that most people don't want to carry the weight of individuality. To become truly free means to accept your uniqueness in its totality, to stand apart, to no longer merge with the herd. And this, Jung warned, is terrifying. Because outside the herd, the wolves circle. To be free is to be vulnerable, alone against the chaos of existence. Nietzsche, in his blazing words, called freedom the highest risk. He wrote that those who pursue it must be ready to climb mountains without maps, to live without the consolations of certainty. But most people, he said, would rather remain last men, comfortable, safe, anesthetized by routine, than dare the dangerous freedom of the overman. And so humanity lives half asleep, confusing security for happiness, confusing submission for peace. But the roots of this fear dig even deeper. Freedom confronts us with the raw truth of responsibility. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on his time in Nazi concentration camps, argued that meaning is never given, it must be chosen. Even in chains, he said, man is free to choose his response. But here lies the paradox. If even in suffering we are free to choose, then we can never escape responsibility. No matter the conditions, the burden of decision clings to us. Freedom does not liberate us from weight, it crushes us with more of it. This explains why so many secretly prefer authority. Authority absolves. When a leader, a god, a system tells us what to do, we are shielded from the terror of choice. If the path fails, we can blame the map. But if we alone draw the map, if we alone choose the direction, then failure is ours to own completely. Schopenhauer took the thought further. Perhaps we don't even want freedom at all. What we truly want, he said, is release from suffering. Freedom, with its infinite demands, is not relief but agony. To choose endlessly is to suffer endlessly. How strange, then, that we glorify liberty while spending our days inventing systems, routines, and institutions that cage us again. We fear the very chaos of possibility. Psychology confirms this. Studies on choice overload reveal that when humans are given too many options, anxiety spikes, satisfaction plummets, paralysis sets in. A single decision among 3 options feels empowering. A decision among 30 feels suffocating. Now imagine freedom not as 30 choices, but as infinite. Infinite careers. Infinite identities. Infinite purposes. Is it any wonder that so many collapse under the pressure and run back to the safety of structure? Jean-Paul Sartre called this the vertigo of existence. Standing before the abyss of infinite choice, we experience nausea, the realization that nothing outside us dictates who we must be. We are condemned to be free, he said. Condemned, because freedom is not a gift but a sentence, an endless responsibility to invent ourselves from nothing. This is the hidden problem. Freedom is not just an open door. It is the collapse of the walls that defined us, the erasure of the signs that guided us. It is stepping into a boundless desert with no compass, no shelter, and no guarantee of water. Most people, when faced with this horizon, do not run forward. They crawl back to the prison cell and lock themselves inside, grateful for the comfort of chains. But here's the cruel twist. Even when we seek safety in systems, we cannot fully escape freedom. What happens when we deny freedom? When we retreat from its vast and terrifying expanse into the safety of cages? The answer is not peace, as we imagine, but a slow corrosion of the soul, a quiet despair that eats away at us from within. The unseen consequences of fleeing freedom shape nearly every aspect of our lives, though most of us never notice. Consider first the individual. When a person hands over their freedom to authority, whether that authority is a government, a religion, a corporation, or even a family, they may feel secure, but that security comes at a hidden cost. Their choices no longer spring from authentic desire, but from obedience, imitation, and fear of rejection. Over time, they lose the ability to hear their own inner voice. The instincts dull. The imagination weakens. The very sense of self withers like an unused muscle. You can see it in the eyes of people who live only to fulfill expectations. The student who studies not for love of knowledge, but because that's what's required. The worker who punches in each morning not out of passion, but because that's what's expected. They move through life like sleepwalkers, alive yet not truly living. They have traded the burden of freedom for the comfort of numbness. But numbness, over time, becomes its own form of suffering. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, the condition in which, after repeated surrender, a person no longer believes they can act freely at all. Even when the door to the cage is open, they remain inside, convinced escape is impossible. This is the tragedy of many lives. People spend decades believing themselves trapped, never realizing the bars were imaginary. But the consequences ripple outward into society. Entire cultures can be built on the rejection of freedom. Totalitarian regimes thrive not merely because they impose control, but because millions silently accept it, preferring certainty to chaos. The tyrant rules not just with violence, but with the secret consent of those who fear the abyss of choice more than the iron fist of control. Look closely at modern life. We live in societies that loudly proclaim freedom, yet subtly condition us to avoid it. Advertising bombards us with choices. But these choices are hollow, different brands of the same product, endless distractions designed to consume our attention. Social media drowns us in curated images of what we should desire, what we should become, until we begin to mistake conformity for individuality. We believe we are free because we can choose between thousands of apps, careers, and lifestyles. But beneath the surface, our decisions are molded by invisible hands. This is the most dangerous consequence. When freedom is rejected, control does not vanish, it simply disguises itself. We may not kneel before kings, but we kneel before algorithms, before the approval of strangers, before the pressure of trends and culture. And because we think we are free, we never realize how deeply conditioned we truly are. Neurology offers a chilling insight here. The brain craves efficiency. It creates patterns, routines, habits, shortcuts to conserve energy. Left unchecked, these patterns harden into prisons. The longer we repeat a behavior, the deeper the neural grooves become, until the brain itself resists change. In this way, we become biological prisoners of our own avoidance. What began as a choice, I'll stay safe, I'll follow the rules, becomes, over time, no choice at all. But the consequences don't stop with individuals or societies. They echo into the deepest layers of meaning itself. When we deny freedom, we deny the possibility of authenticity. Sartre warned that living without embracing freedom is to live in bad faith, to wear masks, to play roles, to lie to ourselves about who we truly are. And the punishment for bad faith is subtle but merciless, an emptiness that grows each year, until one day, perhaps in old age, we realize we have lived someone else's life entirely. Is this not the silent epidemic of our time? Millions scrolling endlessly, consuming endlessly, obeying endlessly, yet haunted by a quiet voice whispering, "This is not who I am." They silence it with busyness, with entertainment, with substances, with distractions. But at night, when the distractions fade, the whisper grows louder. And if ignored for too long, it can erupt into crisis, depression, rage, or the gnawing sense that life is meaningless. Freedom denied returns as despair. And here lies the cruel paradox once again. The very freedom we flee is the only cure for the despair caused by fleeing it. Only by embracing responsibility, by facing the terrifying openness of life, can meaning be forged. But most refuse. Most will choose the predictable misery of cages over the unpredictable terror of freedom. This has been true across history. Consider how societies respond to revolutions. When the old systems collapse, when authority vanishes, the people rejoice, for a moment. But soon the vacuum of freedom becomes unbearable. Chaos erupts. And almost inevitably, a new authority rises to take the place of the old, often welcomed with relief. The cycle continues because the hidden problem is never faced. Humanity fears freedom more than it fears tyranny. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a vast abyss. The ground beneath you represents security, rules, expectations, the familiar weight of obedience. The abyss before you is freedom, terrifying, infinite, unknown. Most turn back. A few, trembling, step forward. The rebellion begins in that single step, in the refusal to retreat to the cage. But how does one break free? How can you rebel not against governments or systems, but against the deeper prison, your own fear of liberty? The first act of rebellion is brutal honesty. You must stop lying to yourself. Sartre called it bad faith when we pretend we are victims of circumstance, when we say, "I had no choice." The rebellion begins when you whisper the dangerous truth, "I always had a choice. I chose my prison." That realization is like fire. It burns illusions, but it illuminates reality. The second act is responsibility. Not the shallow responsibility of paying bills or meeting deadlines, but the radical responsibility of owning your existence. Nietzsche dared humanity to create its own values, to become the artist of life rather than the follower of tradition. This is not comfortable. It means no excuses, no scapegoats. If your life feels empty, you must fill it. If your choices lead to suffering, you must endure it. To embrace this responsibility is to stop waiting for the world to hand you meaning, and instead forge it yourself, as a blacksmith forges iron in the fire. But rebellion is not just philosophy, it is practice. And practice begins small. Freedom is not seized in one grand gesture, but cultivated in daily acts of defiance against conformity. It is the artist who paints what cannot be sold, the student who asks the forbidden question, the worker who refuses to measure life by promotions and instead chooses passion, the individual who says no not out of rebellion for its own sake, but out of a deeper yes to their authentic self. This rebellion is quiet, but it is dangerous. Because once you taste authenticity, the illusions of safety lose their flavor. Once you create meaning with your own hands, no authority can fully own you. That is the secret feared by every tyrant and every institution. A person who has embraced their freedom cannot be controlled. History offers us examples. Socrates drank poison rather than betray his commitment to truth. Rosa Parks sat down in defiance and stood up for an entire people. Viktor Frankl, even in Auschwitz, chose to live by meaning rather than despair. Each of them demonstrates the same principle. Freedom does not mean the absence of chains, it means the refusal to surrender the final authority over your own soul. But rebellion is not easy. It demands courage, and courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act despite fear. The rebel feels the same nausea, the same vertigo of freedom, but steps forward anyway. And in that step, something miraculous happens, the abyss begins to transform. What once looked like emptiness reveals itself as possibility. The silence of freedom becomes not loneliness, but space for creation. Psychology supports this transformation. Studies on resilience show that when people willingly take responsibility for their choices, they experience greater meaning and vitality, even in hardship. The brain rewires itself when we stop seeing ourselves as victims and begin to act as agents. What was once paralysis becomes momentum. Still, rebellion is not without danger. Nietzsche warned of the risk of nihilism. The abyss can consume those who step into it unprepared. To avoid this, rebellion must be paired with creation. It is not enough to tear down old values, you must build new ones. It is not enough to say, I reject the cage. You must also say, here is the life I will live instead. Without creation, rebellion collapses into chaos. This is where philosophy becomes poetry. To rebel is to write your own scripture, to sculpt your own cathedral out of experience, to compose your own symphony of values. You may fail. In fact, you will fail often. But failure in freedom is nobler than success in servitude. Imagine that you have leapt. You stood on the cliff, trembling, staring into the abyss of freedom, and you jumped. For a moment, there was only terror, only the sensation of falling into nothing. But then something unexpected happened. The fall did not kill you. The abyss did not consume you. Instead, in the silence of weightlessness, you discovered wings. This is the ultimate truth about freedom. What we fear as emptiness is actually the birthplace of creation. What looks like a void is, in reality, a canvas. The terror of freedom is not the end of meaning but the beginning of it. True liberation does not strip life of purpose. It hands us the sacred responsibility to invent it. The mistake we make is assuming that meaning must already exist, waiting for us like a treasure buried in the sand. We dig desperately for signs, for maps, for instructions from gods, governments, or gurus. But the truth is more radical. Meaning is not found, it is made. Freedom is terrifying precisely because it reveals that no one else can do the making for you. Nietzsche hinted at this when he spoke of the death of God, not as an attack on faith, but as a recognition that old certainties no longer hold. The death of God is the death of external authority, the collapse of ready-made meaning. It leaves us naked, trembling, responsible for creating our own values. But it also liberates us. For in that space of nothingness, we become artists of existence. Viktor Frankl, surviving the hell of Auschwitz, discovered the same truth, that even in the most brutal circumstances, man retains the freedom to choose his attitude, to carve meaning from suffering itself. If meaning can be forged in the furnace of horror, then surely it can be forged anywhere. The final realization is not that life comes prepackaged with purpose, but that purpose is the fire we ignite within it. But here's the paradox that deepens the mystery. Freedom is not about doing whatever you want, whenever you want. That kind of freedom quickly collapses into chaos and emptiness. True freedom is the ability to bind yourself willingly to a purpose, a creation, a responsibility so deeply chosen that it no longer feels like a cage but like wings. This is what philosophers call self-transcendence. To be free is not merely to stand apart from the herd, it is to go beyond yourself, to commit your freedom to something greater than comfort, greater than security. A work of art, a cause, a love, a vision of what humanity could bear. In that act of willing bondage, you paradoxically discover the highest freedom of all. Think of the sculptor who spends decades chiseling stone, the scientist who devotes a life to uncovering hidden truths, the parent who gives themselves fully to raising a child. To an outsider, these lives might look limited, bound, even constrained. But to the one who has chosen them freely, they are expansive, luminous, alive. The sculptor is freer in their studio than the wanderer who drifts without aim. The parent is freer in their devotion than the cynic who avoids all ties. Freedom is not the absence of chains, it is the presence of chosen chains. This is the ultimate realization. Freedom is not about escaping responsibility, but about embracing the infinite responsibility of choosing what is worth living and dying for. And once you choose, the abyss transforms. No longer a void, it becomes a horizon. No longer a terror, it becomes a promise. But this truth demands something of you. It demands courage, not once, but every day. Because freedom is not a prize you win and keep forever. It is a practice, a discipline, a daily leap into uncertainty. Each morning, you wake again on the edge of the cliff. Each day, you must choose to jump, to create, to affirm. And yet, once you understand the secret, the leap no longer feels like death. It feels like flight. This is why true freedom is scary. Not because it destroys meaning, but because it reveals the terrifying truth that you are the source of it. You are the painter, the sculptor, the author, the architect. The pen has always been in your hand, though you spent years pretending otherwise. The cage was never locked. The door was always open. And now, you must ask yourself, what will you create? What purpose will you bind yourself to? What meaning will you forge in the furnace of your existence? Do not expect an easy answer. Do not expect certainty. But expect this. When you choose, truly choose, something miraculous happens. The despair that once haunted you recedes. The emptiness that once paralyzed you transforms into possibility. The life that once felt borrowed finally begins to feel like your own. And when the final day comes, when death stands at the threshold, you will not tremble like one who lived in cages. You will not look back with regret at a life half-lived. You will meet death as one who was free, who bore the unbearable weight of existence and transformed it into a masterpiece. Because freedom, in the end, is not about safety. It is not about certainty. It is not even about happiness. Freedom is about truth, the truth of who you are, stripped of illusions, standing raw before the universe, and daring to say, I chose. I lived. I was free. So now the question turns to you. Will you retreat to the comfort of the cage? Or will you leap into the abyss and discover your wings? The choice, terrifying and beautiful, has always been yours.